Rona, great to be able to catch up with you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. I think there's maybe a bit of a delay on the line. We'll work with that. Rona, I'm curious to get your perspective in terms of where Canada stands right now, particularly as former health minister, in terms of the right approach, really balancing the economic needs with the health needs of Canadians across the board, to the point where some would say that the cure might be worse than the disease by shutting down businesses for a prolonged period. What's your view today?
Well, I think the key to keeping our economy open is testing. And when we look at the different provinces' approach across the country, because they really are in control of the health systems in this country, we see in Alberta, where testing is some of the best in the world, that we've been able to manage COVID in certain regions much better than others. I think having rapid testing, having antigen testing, which has finally been approved by Health Canada, available to schools, to businesses, to post-secondary institutions, to daycares, is absolutely key to getting our economy open and keeping it open.
And why aren't we doing as well across the board when you look at that? What's holding us back from being better across Canada?
Well, unfortunately, I think that some provinces just didn't have the right amount of lab capacity set up to manage more testing. They needed to get on that much earlier. We see some of them catching up now, which is good to see. We also see some upstart private companies offering COVID testing, which is helpful to fill in some of those gaps. But at the end of the day, the only way that we can keep our economy open and not have to be constantly quarantining ourselves or our children or an entire cohort of a building floor is to have rapid testing available so that we can get people back to work, back to school, so moms can get back to work.
Right. And Rona, at the same time, too, though, when we take a look at the markets and, of course, all the commentary, including President Trump yesterday in terms of his Regeneron antibody cocktail, we're all thinking about the possibility of a vaccine or, again, some type of antibody cocktail approach. What do we need to do in Canada to ensure that a rollout of such an item or a vaccine will go off without a hitch, that everybody has access? How do we do that?
Well, we already do that for flu vaccines every single year. The federal government has an agreement where they bulk purchase all of the flu vaccines on behalf of the provincial government so that we get a better rate. And then that's rolled out to the provincial governments and it's distributed through the health systems. Now, we might want to get that out the door a lot faster than our flu vaccines happen, but we have all of those distribution channels in place because we already do it with the flu vaccine. Having said that, depending on which vaccine is successful, some of these vaccines have to be refrigerated at very serious cold temperatures. And so there might be issues in how we handle them. But at the end of the day, we do have those distribution channels in place. So once we know which of the vaccines is safe and effective, and it sounds like at least one of them could be ready by the end of this year, according to the WHO, then hopefully we'll be able to get those moving and out the door for Canadians.
And Ron, as we think about the impact that COVID-19 has had, we will have the jobs numbers out tomorrow. There's been so much discussion that women have really been displaced and felt an outsized negative impact in terms of needing to stay at home, caring for the children, caring for elders, and that they will permanently be displaced in the workforce. What's your view of that, and also what we're calling the she session?
I believe that it's true, and I think the facts are very clear. First of all, the sectors that have been most impacted employ the majority of their workforce are women. When we think of any face-to-face type retail or restaurant business, tourism, I could go on and on. But women who are in the corporate world who have potentially been able to hang on to their jobs, many of them are at home. They've had to been homeschooling. They don't have access to daycare. And even if we get kids back into school, back into daycare, we have a very tenuous situation around how stable and secure those formal structures are because of COVID. At any moment, the whole daycare could be quarantined. Mom is back at home. And look, lots of men do a lot of good work in the home, but at the end of and contribute a lot. But at the end of the day, women continue to be the primary caregiver of kids and of elderly parents. And right now they're feeling overwhelmed, so overwhelmed that statistics are showing that 1 in 3 women have talked about just leaving the workforce. So imagine that feeling of being overwhelmed and anxious at home, trying to balance everything. And then your employer saying, well, we want you back at work now. And here you are on a path in your career, trying to promote yourself, advance your career, compete in the workforce and within your company. And looking at that and thinking, I can't do both. So a lot of women are at that point, and we've got to figure out how we can support them as we move through and get successfully to a vaccine.
Yeah, absolutely. Just quick question on that front, though. Do you think that there should be a rollout of a universal daycare system across Canada? I don't have children, and I'm surprised. I don't know how people do it sometimes, really.
Well, I think, the problem is the way that they've always done it just disappeared in one moment. I mean, overnight we had the shutdown of daycares, day homes. Grandma couldn't come help anymore. Neighbor couldn't help anymore. We had schools closed down. So all those formal structures that we worked so hard to put in place just disappeared. And right now they're extremely precarious. We don't know if they'll be there in a week or even tomorrow if something happens with COVID. Talking about more daycare spaces is great, but at the end of the day, this is all about controlling the spread of the virus. So I go back to this idea of testing. If we can have better testing protocols, that would help us keep schools open, not have to potentially quarantine people for 2 weeks, perhaps for 7 days with better testing regimes, and just make testing more available. If all of a sudden one of the kids is sick in your kid's class, you've got to take your kid out, take them to testing. You're waiting for 8 hours in a lineup to get a test before you find out your child is negative. Perhaps they can go back to school in a couple of days. So I think a lot of this revolves around making sure that we have adequate testing.
Okay. And Rona, for a woman who don't necessarily know, or everybody doesn't know, you have been a huge advocate for women, which is amazing, and also for girls, helping to create, leading the charge really behind the International Day of the Girl, which is on October the 11th. You did this, I think, 8 years ago now. And on the back of that, you have a new book, the International Day of the Girl. Talk to us a little bit, first and foremost, how did you come up with this idea for this book?
Well, thank you, and thank you for mentioning it. I happen to have a copy right here, and I'll make sure I send you one. Why I came up. You and I and many of us talk about gender equality all the time. It's a buzzword, it's a real word, but people talk about it in boardrooms, they talk about it in governments and around the kitchen table. But how do we talk to kids about it? And I'm a big believer that if we teach children at a young age what their rights are, they're more willing to exercise them. And we really need to do that with girls. So what this book is about is really about having conversations and learning in a storybook format for young kids what gender equality is and why everyone should be equal. Boys and girls should be treated equally. So there's 9 stories of 9 girls from all around the world, and of course there's 1 Canadian girl in it, about the kinds of things that girls face, injustices, like early childhood marriage, illiteracy, living in a refugee camp. But the stories are told in a very upbeat way, while educational. They're inspiring, and they're really about girls using their voice to overcome some really tough challenges. And it's teaching kids about, how to get active, how to be a global citizen, how to use their voice for change. And really at the end of the day, it's having that conversation with kids while they're at that young age about why equality is so important.
But Rona, give us the details in terms of how you came up with this idea. How did this happen?
Oh, well, actually, I can't take credit for that, because it was a group of girls who actually had this idea and ambushed me, I could say, on the way to a meeting at the United Nations and said, basically, you guys, you women, you have International Women's Day. We want International Day of the Girl, a day for girls so we can highlight the things that we uniquely face. And so they needed a voice, they needed a champion, and I got on their wonderful crusade with them, and off we went. We introduced a resolution at the United Nations not that long later. And it's one of the only resolutions that we've passed actually at the United Nations, supported by many countries. And it's now 9 years later, a global movement. So these girls use their voice and they made a huge impact.